excited to have Mai Neng Vang here and her new book. And we'll introduce her in a minute. But in the meantime, I want to thank the Eastside Freedom Library and the Roseville Library for their support and co-sponsorship of our History Revealed programs. We've been going on since I checked it today, and since 2017. So, we're on 5 years now, which is great. And again, I'm Robin with the Ramsey County Historical Society, and I want to thank those of you who are supporters and members of our CHS, as well as supporters and members of the Eastside Freedom Library and the Ramsey County Libraries. Your support makes all these programs possible. Without that, we would not be able to put these programs on for all of you. And there's some great other benefits to joining our CHS, including our quarterly magazine. And you can find out about our CHS on our website, which is rchs.com. And you can also find out a lot about the Eastside Freedom Library on their website, which is eastsidefreedomlibrary.org. I want to invite everybody next week. We're going to have a very special History Revealed program with Terry Swanson, the author of our new book, Grasshoppers in My Bed, Lily Bell Gibbs, Minnesota Farm Girl, 1877, and the illustrator Peggy Stern. It's sort of on a roll, the book is. It's a really great book. It's historical fiction, but it's based on the family and papers and drawings of Lily Bell Gibbs, who was the daughter of Jane and Heman Gibbs, who started the Gibbs Farm, which is our historic site that's up on Larpenteur in Cleveland. So we're really looking forward to next week and that really special History Revealed with Terry and Peggy. As a reminder, please keep your microphones and personal cameras turned off during the program. And feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat at any time, and Peter and I will read those out loud for Mai Neng to answer. The program will be recorded and will be up on our RCHS and Eastside Freedom Library YouTube channels shortly. We'd like to acknowledge the sacred Dakota land, Minnesota Mekoche, the land where the waters are so clear they reflect the clouds, is the ancestral and contemporary homeland of the Dakota people. It is also home to the Anishinaabe and other indigenous peoples. The Ramsey County Historical Society acknowledges that its sites are located on and benefit from these sacred Dakota lands. Ramsey County Historical Society is committed to preserving our past, informing our present, and inspiring our future. Part of doing so is acknowledging the painful history and current challenges facing the Dakota people, just as we celebrate the contributions of Dakota and other indigenous peoples. You can find our full land acknowledgement statement on our website. Again, that's www.rchs.com. And that includes actionable ways in which RCHS pledges to honor the Dakota and other indigenous peoples of Minnesota Mekoche. I'm going to turn it over to Peter Ratcliffe from the Eastside Freedom Library, who can talk a little bit about what we're planning for 2022 in our Making Minnesota series, and he will introduce Mai Neng. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Robin. And again, thank everyone. Thank you all for coming. This is really a very special evening. I have been captivated by Mai Neng Vang's poetry and her story. And we are trying at the Eastside Freedom Library, with support from the Ray Phillips family, to purchase copies of books of presenters like Mai Neng that we can then give away. And so we have a small stack of copies of the book that she will be reading from tonight. Come see us at the Eastside Freedom Library and ask for your complimentary copy of the book. A little bit of background about Mai Neng. She was born in a refugee camp in Thailand, came as a child to Eau Claire, Wisconsin, graduated from high school there and went to the University of Wisconsin at Eau Claire, where not only did she get herself a great education, but she also became a political activist. And in her introduction to this book, she really tells great stories about the activism, not only of hers, but of other Hmong students at UW Eau Claire. That has led her not only to become a poet, but also to be pursuing a PhD in education policy at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. She is going to change institutions here in the United States. And we are all going to feel so fortunate to have met her this evening and gotten a sense of her liver, her heart, her mind. We're really in for something special. And I think that Mai Neng's engagement with trauma, with healing, and with using art as a way not only to tell stories, but to promote progressive political change is exactly what the Eastside Freedom Library is about. And so we're very honored to have her with us this evening. And as Robin said, feel free to drop questions and comments in the chat. I think we're going to be a small enough group this evening that when Mai Neng is done with her presentation, we can all reveal ourselves and unmute and just have a conversation. So, Mai Neng, we're all yours.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Peter, thank you for reaching out to me and asking me to be a part of this series. I'm so excited, and I'm so excited about the work that the library is also doing as well. So tonight, I want to do something a little bit different. I want to present part of my presentation in poetry form. So I'll be doing that, and I've incorporated some of my poems from the book into it as well. But I want to start off with a video. Okay. What is your name, ma'am? My name. Yes, your name. My name is Mai Neng, given to me by Guya. It is everything powerful and meaningful, embodying the strength from where I come. You won't find it in your white baby name books, but you stripped my name of its Hmong origins and robbed it of its significance when you colonized my name like you colonized my mind, the same way you twisted my tongue just so it would make sense for yours. But you still confuse my two-part first name for a first and middle. I am a whole person. Stop reading only half of my name. Mai Neng is my people's way of life. It is a healer called upon to resuscitate. It is the belief in our ancestors' protection. It advocates harmony between our world and the spiritual. It is healing, protecting, and balancing, all rolled up into Mai Neng. Mai Neng rings like the Ju on Guya's fingers as he called home my soul for the 7th of October. Mai Neng sounds like Gunia's voice on a cold November night as she calls in a new year that brings abundant blessings. But Mai Neng sounds so crude and so dry, coming from your anglicized, colonized, tone-deaf tongue. Ma'am? I look up and respond. Mai Neng, that is my name. All right. So I want to start off by sharing why, or actually the impetus for my writing this book and actually putting it out there. As Peter mentioned, there's an introduction in my book that it's a book of poetry, but the introduction is more of an essay of some of the things that happened while I was at UW-Eau Claire. At UW-Eau Claire, I was part of a group called the Hmong Studies Initiative. We were a student-led, student activist group that were trying to push for critical Hmong studies at UW-Eau Claire. I mean, we certainly weren't the first to push for Hmong studies at UW-Eau Claire. There was a 10-year struggle before we came along and did some more pushing. And in my introduction, I write about an incident that actually led to a little bit more institutional response. So I actually wrote the book thinking and wanting to give back to the Hmong Studies Initiative at UW-Eau Claire. So I've been writing poetry since, since I was little, as long as I was able to read. I used to love Dr. Seuss because of all the rhyming. But even before I went to school and was able to read English, I would always listen to Dejsiab, which is Hmong poetic song. I listened to Dejsiab with my mom and my grandpa, and both of them also sing Dejsiab as well. And so I was always intrigued by poetry and the way that poetry is able to help us feel things that we know exist in this world. It's not just describing the things in this world, but it really helps us to feel those things. And so I've always written poetry. And I started putting out poetry on my social media a few years ago, kind of right, I think it was like a few years before the pandemic. And folks were asking me why or they were asking me if I was going to publish a book. And I said, no, I don't think so. And then I actually, in 2019, I believe, met Brian at a conference that I was at in the Twin Cities, and learned a little bit more about the Hmong educational resource. And I was publishing a company, and I was like, oh, that's so great. What an awesome platform. I just love that that her publisher was giving a space for Hmong creators to be able to get the works out there. And I was really then actually intrigued by that and was like, hey, yeah, why don't I see if I can compile my poetry and write some more poetry and put it out there. So I reached out to Brian, and that's kind of how we got the project started. But I really wanted to put my work out there and, like I said, give back to the Hmong Studies Initiative at UW-Eau Claire. So I thought, I would love to write this book and give 100% of the proceeds that I get from it back to the program. So I have been doing that for the last couple of years since the book has been published. All of the proceeds that I've received, I've given back to the Critical Hmong Studies program. So I hope that speaks to how much how important critical Hmong studies is in my life. I want to read something from my introduction about what the Hmong Studies Initiative, our activist group, did for me. And it is exactly what I hope that all ethnic studies program and spaces across the country will do for all minoritized students. I think that it's, and I think especially as we're facing budget cuts, sometimes ethnic studies programs are the first to go. And that's something that I always try to fight against, right? Because, and not that we have to justify why these things are important to us, because we learn, things that, or we learn about white history all the time. Why can't we learn about the histories of minoritized peoples, right? And we shouldn't have to justify why these things are worthy of learning. Unfortunately, in the world that we live in, we do have to do that. So anyways, part of the book is really this fight for, or this trying to make an appeal and an argument for critical Hmong studies specifically, but more broadly for ethnic studies. So I'm going to read a little bit of my introduction here. HSI empowered me to speak even if my voice is soft, to stand even if my legs tremble, and to fight even when I feel defeated. HSI helped me to forgive myself for not being born politicized, for internalizing different forms of oppression, for upholding dominant ideologies, for hating myself as a Hmong American woman, for taking 21 years to decolonize my worldview. HSI provided a space for me to learn and grow and to be patient with myself and others, because our thoughts and beliefs are dynamic and they are constantly being informed by the things we learn through our daily lived experiences and interactions. HSI gave me a community on a predominantly white campus where I felt invisible. This community was more than just friendships. It was an intellectual community wherein I not only learned alongside my peers, but definitely learned from them as well. This community of peers and mentors validated my experiences and anger and reminded me that we are not doing anti-oppressive work alone, that we cannot do this work alone. Radical change can only come about as a result of mass struggle and resistance in its various forms. HSI taught me to engage in continuous critical self-reflection, even if it is painful. Being self-reflexive has helped me to understand how I can reproduce the very power relationships, behaviors, and oppressive ideas that I am critical of. Finally, HSI showed me the value of student activism, but that my number one job is to exist and persist in this space that was never made for me. Having been a part of HSI has taught me that with regards to fighting institutional oppressions, the institution believes the fight is temporary because students are only here for a few years. They will burn us out or they will wait us out. But we can combat this by continuing to pass on the torch for equity and inclusion. I may have been part of the initial group of students that started the fire, but it is for sure my peers the following year after I graduated that continue to keep that fire growing, and surely the students who have come after them are the ones that are continuing to pass on the torch. The anti-oppression movement is a tiresome one. It is one that may never end, but it is one that is worth fighting, not just for ourselves, but for our brothers and sisters who will be coming after us. Okay, so I also wanted to address how I write Hmong in this in the book, but also just more generally in my everyday life and academic life as well. I spell it as H, capital M, OOB, and this again is just my own kind of personal take on this. I lead a group at UW-Madison here. I'm a research mentor for a participatory action research team called our Hmong American College Bandao. And it's actually the young people that I work with that that have decided that this is how they want to identify themselves. And so I've kind of taken up on it with them when they came out with this writing a few years ago. So they were a group of Hmong college students that both identified as white Hmong and Mai Neng. And we, at the time, I think a lot of them were struggling with how Hmong, the anglicized spelling Hmong, didn't feel representative of how they saw themselves and how they wanted to be seen. And so that kind of started this conversation amongst the team about how they want to be recognized. And so they, a lot of them then they kind of came to this spelling. And part of it is to the capital H and capital M is to kind of recognize both White Hmong and Green Hmong dialects. But also they chose to spell it using the RPA Hmong spelling, HMOOB, because of the because they just felt that that was the way that closest represented our native tongue and the way that what we call ourselves, Hmong, right? And not Hmong. And so that's kind of how they came to that. And I think it's so important to let young people kind of have that agency to choose the representation of who they are, and to really be able to put out there how they want to be seen. And I think it's really empowering. And I was really inspired and empowered by their insistence in wanting to be recognized in this way. And we actually struggled quite a lot with trying to get things published. We have a couple academic articles that have been published, and some op-eds that have been published, but that was something that we have continued to have to justify with every place that we tried to get our pieces published in, with how we spell Hmong and why we choose to spell it that way. And I think, especially now with the conversations that are going on in the Twin Cities about between the White Hmong and Green Hmong spelling of things, and just, what is representative, what is inclusive, what isn't. Our team hasn't actually had conversations about how we fit into this conversation. That's the larger conversation here that's going on, because the school year ended, and so we haven't actually talked about these things, but I am excited to get back together with a team and have these conversations to see, what our young people think about what's going on. And so I just wanted to bring that up, as I know it's quite relevant right now, and there's a lot of these conversations going around. So so that's why I wanted to address that. So now let me turn to the poetry part of my presentation here. I want us to go on a journey together. So I'm going to paint a picture with words for you all. All right. Together, let's begin in the mountains of Laos. I know many of us have never been in these highlands, and some of us have never even set foot in Laos. But let your imagination take you there. Let your creativity paint the different shades of greens and browns that you may find here. My elders cultivated life in the rural hillsides of the motherland, their mother's land, the world I never got to know, where the soil was rich but the climate toxic. They sowed seeds that sprouted as the acid rain poured down, and my elders were forced to uproot their lives and unripened dreams, carrying with them seedlings of critical hope. They nourished these transplants into saplings of survival with buds of resistance that blossomed. I am the flower that bloomed from my elders' resilience through politically inflicted drought, and now I flourish as I continue to reap the fruits of my elders' labor. Now, let us journey across oceans to the coldness of Wisconsin with its endless miles of whiteness and wind chills so cold it can cut across skin. My in-laws shared with me that before they were resettled in these United States of America, they heard that in this country, there were nyas that roamed about. They flew into Wisconsin in the middle of winter and noticed that people rarely spent time outside. Because their neighborhood was so quiet and they hardly saw anyone on the streets, their fears about the nya were confirmed. It must be that their neighbors were also scared of going out and risking running into a nya, so they too barely went outside. We know that there are no nya like the ones we've heard about in the folk stories our elders tell. The giants with tusks sharp enough to kill and mouths large enough to swallow people whole. No, these nya do not exist here. But we face other nyas in this country. These nyas harm us in other ways. My elders have described coming to this country as a rebirth. Zhongli yu dagaseng yu do. But you are an orphan, trying to navigate your survival in a world that seems so new, so different, so terrifying, a place where one must relearn everything, from how to speak to how to interact, from having to learn how to use a stove to flushing toilets. Imagine the terror of hearing fireworks go off on your first 4th of July, wondering if Nyala had followed us here, and then every 4th of July after that, having to relive the trauma of hearing guns and bombs go off, even as showers of bright, colorful wonders fill the night sky after the loud bangs. Because here we celebrate the freedom that our families came for, a freedom that not all of us have access to yet. In 1994, a little 4-year-old girl from Chengkham survived the illnesses that plagued the impoverished alleys of an overcrowded refugee camp, found herself in a strange world, surrounded by strangers speaking a language she could not understand. She befriended a used toy computer donated by a local church. She would spend hours listening to the computer and pressing buttons, more for fun than anything. But somehow this Fisher-Price friend taught her the English ABCs and words like cat and fish and hat. Then in 3rd grade, this girl discovered she really liked to read and write, but mostly write. She wrote of characters like Tara and Brad, wrote about a life she never experienced, but yet she wrote, because she experienced these lives through watching TV. Let me tell you, when my people's history does not appear in my history textbooks because we were meant to be kept a secret, when the secret was so well kept, I never knew the war my Yotzi used to tell me stories about and the war I learned about in my 9th grade US history class were one and the same. When we have been written out of the pages of the curriculum because we were seen as disposable and non-profitable, I have learned to write myself out of the pages of my own stories. Boxes and boxes of notebooks from my parents' basement, and not a single one was about me, a Hmong preteen girl. And now I am still learning to love those parts of myself that I rejected 25 years ago. For though you cannot see the scars that 14 years of public schooling have left, I am reminded every day that I fight so hard so that one day, no Hmong child will say to herself that she won't speak Hmong at school, so her classmates will befriend her. So no Hmong child will believe that her culture and her people are unintelligent and undesirable. So no Hmong child will be embarrassed to pack for lunch the food her mom cooks at home. So no Hmong child will feel the burden of having to explain who the Hmong are and where we come from. So no Hmong child will have to wonder where she goes to visit the homeland her parents talk so fondly of. So no Hmong child will have to question whether she's Hmong enough or how she can be more Americanized to fit in, so that all Hmong children will feel valued in their skin and see that they too are worthy of love. I used to question if I am less Hmong if my Hmong does not sound like my parents. And are my parents not Hmong if their Hmong doesn't sound like my grandparents? Are you less Hmong because your Hmong does not sound like mine? Because though I have learned how to read and write my mother tongue, using a written system developed in the 1950s by French missionaries as a way to spread the word of their God, I cannot speak it well. Though I have received passing grades in my Hmong language classes at the university, my tongue betrays the language I dream in. Why has it taken 20 plus years of public education before I felt pride in speaking Hmong? But now my tongue feels thick and stubborn because they cut my native tongue out from my mouth, threw it into the melting pot of this America, and boiled it until I couldn't recognize it anymore. Now they've sold it back to me, but my native tongue feels like a stranger in its own home. So I grew up in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and when we first moved, when we were first resettled in Eau Claire, we were placed in city housing in an area that had a lot of other refugee families and a lot of other families of color. And Eau Claire is actually very white, so there were not a lot of families of color. But the area that we lived in is now kind of the downtown Eau Claire area that has been gentrified. So I wrote a poem about Dejsiab or Eau Claire and the gentrification that has happened there. When we look at the Phoenix Park area, that is now Phoenix Park in Eau Claire, it's complete. It's super beautiful. The landscaping is beautiful. Parking is always crowded on nice summer days. So it's really hard to know that once upon a time ago, actually not that long ago, there once was a different life there. Yellow, the color of Nitai and Yotzi's house. A yellow vinyl siding duplex shared with another refugee family belonging to the city, the home where my childhood memories were made, the place where my first memories of the United States of America began. A 4-bedroom, 2-story structure for a refugee family of 10 was not very big, but Nitai and Yotzi's house never felt crowded. Yotzi always reminded us, DJ Chitishia. There was always room for everyone in this yellow home where I learned how to read and write in my native tongue. Today, I go back to the place where my childhood memories lived, but instead of finding a warm yellow vinyl siding 2-story duplex, I see only a monstrous red-brown brick corporate building with large dark windows standing in its place, and I no longer recognize the neighborhood that shaped me. Our once quiet neighborhood now bustles with bikers, runners, music, business, the dry food desert that used to exist with its many taverns and gas stations now overflows with eating options, many of which my family still cannot afford. The hill we used to sneak to as children to pick wildflowers to weave into bracelets and crowns has been flattened, taken over by a large stone labyrinth. The old scary wooden bridge that connected us to a world we didn't know existed now glows with vibrant colors at night. Beyond the hill, the river that we were warned to stay away from because the Ja that lives there steals the souls of children now flows with college tubers on hot summer days. They may have tried to erase us from the memory of this city, but Dejsiab cannot forget the way it tried to discard us, their second-class impoverished refugee residents, with no resources to defend ourselves in the midst of a few months removal notice, under the guise of reviving the downtown area. as if we were not lively, with the sounds of children playing, adults talking and laughing, families calling in good blessings as they sent out Xiong Lao. Little did they know they killed our community in their efforts to revive their city. The yellow house wasn't ours, so the city could force us out of it. But the memories are ours, and no one can ever take that away from us. So I wrote this book. I'm gonna now move away a little bit from the poetry stuff to talk a little bit about my process for writing the book and some of the somewhat stylistic choices that I choose to make in the writing of the book. So the book is written in what I call Hmonglish, and I chose to write it that way without actually providing direct translations for any of the Hmong that I put into my into the book, because for me, Hmonglish is kind of the most it's kind of the most natural language for me, right? I speak Hmonglish all the time. I switch between Hmong and English, and I do it without feeling like I need to translate, because a lot of times, and especially in the book too, it's surrounded by context clues, right? We learned about context clues back in elementary school. When we don't know a word, we read around it to try to figure out what the word means. And that's essentially how I built my poetry is I write in Hmonglish in the form that feels most natural to me, but also I provide so many context clues for what the Hmong in there means that I don't feel the need to translate it. But also I am not writing for I guess when I'm writing, I'm not thinking about writing for a white audience and trying to make a white audience or a non-Hmong audience feel comfortable, right? I think that as minoritized people, we live so much of our lives trying to make other people feel comfortable. We spend so much of our time trying to put out there things that, or reword things so that white people feel comfortable in our presence and with our existence. And I think I didn't feel the need to put out writing that was palatable for a mostly white audience because I wanted to write for my community. I wanted to write for myself. I wanted to write for those that can identify with my writing and with the stories that I tell. And so, and I think that I am so adamant about that because again, I've spent most of my life being uncomfortable trying to make white people comfortable. And I still struggle with that every day, right? And I think that in putting out this book, I really just wanted to put out a piece of my liver that, speaks to me and to the people in my community. And I know that there are people in my community that also doesn't read Hmong, and that's again why I do provide so much context around the terms and the words that I use that are written in the RPA Hmong in the book. And I think I have also, and I worked with a publisher to try to explain that I didn't want, outside of the introduction and in all my poems, I didn't want the Hmong that was in there to be italicized. I know it is common practice to italicize words or terms or anything that is considered foreign. But to me, Hmong is not foreign. Hmong is not foreign to me. And so I don't want it to be italicized because it is not foreign to me, although it may be foreign in the sense of it's foreign to English, right? So yeah, so I think that's a choice that I made in trying to write the book. And so I think for non-Hmong speakers and for people who may not read Hmong language, or the Hmong RPA system, it may be hard to tell where the Hmong ends and where the English kind of starts in the book. And that's okay. I think that, again, I feel like I spend so much of my time trying to explain myself to other folks that the poetry book is just an expression of who I am, with and unapologetically who I am, without having to explain in the book why I chose to write the way that I do. So yeah, I want to go back to talking a little bit about the participatory action research team that I am part of. As I had mentioned, they're kind of the reason why I was inspired to spell Hmong the way that I do. But this group, they're made up of a group of Hmong student activists, college student activists that have been for, I want to say 7-8 years now at UW-Madison, have been trying to push for a Hmong Studies certificate, a Hmong American Studies certificate, or known as a minor in at other universities. But so they've been trying to do this work, and their activism hadn't been taken seriously by administration, and so they actually met with academic researchers in the center that I work for, the Center for Research on College Workforce Transitions. And these two academic researchers came out and, talked to them about how they can partner. And that's kind of how the research team was born. And so we trained these students how to do research. And we trained them to do the work that they wanted to do in order to gather the data that they needed to make a case for why Hmong studies need to exist at UW-Madison. And, as I said before, we shouldn't have to justify why these things need to exist. Unfortunately, we live in a world where we do. And unfortunately, we live in a world where research speaks louder than just a group of students trying to tell their stories. And so, so our team has been trying to use research in our activism, and since the research team has started, they've made so much of an impact here at UW-Madison, and I think for me that's really what education is about, right? Education is not just about consuming knowledge. A critical education should be about empowering students to see themselves as producers of knowledge and as questioners of existing knowledge. Education should be about seeing a spark in students and lighting that spark on fire. And I think that's exactly what this research team does. And that's exactly the place that this research team has in my heart. We have seen now several alums from this research team that are now, in different places of their lives. Some of them are in grad school, some of them are working, but all of them come back to talk about how important having been a part of this research team was. And I go back to talking about, how having the Hmong Studies Initiative for me as a college student was so important. And I think that this is why we keep fighting, right? We keep fighting for ethnic studies, not just at the college level, but at the K-12 level, because of these things that it does for students. We see these things happen, right? And they're so real that when you empower students to see themselves represented, or when they see themselves represented, they are empowered to see themselves as being able to contribute to knowledge, and they're empowered to actually take a more active role in their education. I'm in education policy, but a lot of my work is about student activism, and I think that time and time again, we continue to see the same fight for ethnic studies, and it wouldn't scare people if it wasn't this powerful, right? Like I tell my students all the time, like, why do we have to keep fighting for these things? People were fighting for these things, in the 60s. People were fighting these things or fighting for these things ever since folks of color have entered institutions, right? Like our Black comrades have been fighting for these things. They have paved the way for our activism, right? And so it really is trying to, and I think that's exactly what ethnic studies can do for our students, is to help them see our collective struggles, and also to help them understand the world in which we live in, and to also see themselves as being able to make changes in the world that they see, right? And to empower them to build a better world, because we know that the world we live in is not a world that is safe for everyone that lives here. And so I think, for educators across the country, across the world, that is the heart of education, right? Is to educate and to provide a space for our children so that they can be nourished and they can grow and flourish and make this world a better place for all of us, right? And I think for myself, that's again how I came to this work that I do now, and how I kind of came to the work in my poetry book. I wrote the book in almost a chronological order. I wrote it as in 3 parts. So there's Ndu I, Ndu On, and Ndu Be, or part 1, part 2, and part 3. And the first part is things from my childhood. It's a lot of like the historical kind of stuff. And then the second part is living in the present, the things in my present moment that I'm, struggling with or going through, the healing I'm trying to do as I'm recognizing the trauma that I have, well, some of the trauma that I have inherited, right? And then the third part is looking into the future, and that is really kind of my hope for the future, my vision of this better world that I want to create, that I want our young people to be able to create and someday live in. So I made a choice in writing the book to not include a biography of the author, myself, mostly because the book itself is my autobiography, right? It's essentially, like I said, things from my liver, the stories of my life, the experiences that I had as a young person growing up in this country, struggling with my various identities, and kind of coming into in becoming the person that I am. And so I didn't feel the need for a biography, because if one were to read the book, they would be exposed to who I am as a person. They would know my life, my childhood, and the things that I'm going through now. It's the book itself is a love letter to myself, right? It's a love letter to who I was from who I am, and I just and that's really why I chose not to have a biography. And I think also too, in writing the book, I have also included artwork from UW-Eau Claire alums, as well as at the time current students, as well as children of alums. And so some of the artwork that you'll find in the book are from these various artists. And I wanted to include them, and honestly, the book would not be what it is without the contributions of these artists. They really make the book what it is. I think they are able to paint, well, quite literally paint the things that I'm trying to describe with words, right? And so it's just it's amazing too for me as a writer to see how people represent my written work. So all of the interpretations are done by the artists. And so it's always really cool for me to see that. But I really wanted to provide a book that was a little bit more dynamic for folks. So it's not just like boring poetry or, just a bunch of white space with a couple Black words in there. And so that's really why I chose to do that as well. I will open up the space to let people ask questions about, if you read the book, feel free to ask questions about, certain things that I chose that maybe I didn't address, things that I chose to do in the book, that I didn't address in this presentation. And also so yeah, we could do that in the questions. Feel free to put them in the chat, or, if you have questions and want to ask on the video. Peter, I don't know if people could come on and ask themselves.
Sure.
But okay, yeah, so if folks are comfortable doing that, I would like to do that. I'm happy to address it that way as well. So I let's see, how much time do I have left? Sorry, I lost track of time.
Fine.
But yes, I think again, this is my my push for why ethnic studies is so important, right? And I think, so many of us here do that type of work where we're trying to push for ethnic studies at different levels in the public education system. And it should not, I had to wait till I was in college before I had access to ethnic studies type material. I don't want that to happen for my children. I don't want that to happen for my younger siblings. I don't want them to have to wait till they make it to college. The thing is, many people from my community do not make it to college, right? And so being in college is such a privileged space already that to me, it's appalling that we have to wait till we get here to even get access to some of this work or some of this material. And then we're still fighting for it, right? We're still fighting for it, even at the collegiate level. And that's appalling, but also embarrassing for these. It should be embarrassing for these institutions where so many minoritized students are at, or institutions like UW-Eau Claire, where the community is made up of so many Hmong community members, right? When you have such a large community like that, and you don't have you don't have any curriculum that teaches about this community, it should be embarrassing to your institution. But also, regardless of all those things, right? It's important for people to see themselves represented in the curriculum. And again, that should not have to be justified. But of course, like I said, in this world that we live in, it does have to be. And so we continue the fight. And this is why I'm excited about the work that the East Side Freedom Library is doing. I think it's really exciting to see some of these collections that you all have, and to have access to the things that you do, that you have at the library there, and the work that you continue to do within the community and with the community. So yeah, I'm going to end it there and kind of just leave it, open it up to questions.
So let me encourage, first of all, let me thank you, Mai Neng, for your wonderful presentation and your impassioned arguments and your beautiful poetry. I want to encourage people to turn your videos on and unmute your mics and feel free to speak. I want to say that it's great that Brian Zhang is with us tonight, that Brian is the founder of Hmong Educational Resources Publishers. And it's a beautiful book. The artwork, I mean, there's a sense that no one stopped to calculate how much something was going to cost to make the book look the way it does. It is just a beautiful book. And again, I want to encourage you to come to the Eastside Freedom Library and ask for a copy of it, because we have some to give away. I wanted to ask a question, Mai Neng. If you could talk a little bit about Kotsia and the place of Kotsia in your education at home and in your community, and the impact that Kotsia has had on your writing of poetry.
Yeah, so Gutsia, like I said, I was exposed to it as a young child because my elders listened to it all the time, and when I was younger, I couldn't quite understand some of the Gutsia, right? Because they use words that were, very fancy, or as we would say it in English, big words. They weren't big words, really. They were just really words that were not common in everyday use. And my mom used to explain to me that only the smartest and most clever people could come up with the best Gutsia, because you had to be able, and also somebody who knows the language very well, right? Because to sing very good Gutsia. The Gutsia isn't just about your voice and how it sounds. It's also about the words that you use, and it's the way that you use the words as well. And so if you know the language well, then you are able to play with words and put words together in a way that flows so well, but also sends a message. And I never quite understood that until I started writing my own poetry and realized, wow, that's what my mom meant. So a lot of my poetry, some people had, I've gotten requests to do poetry readings, and people would say, oh, could you do your spoken word? And I'm like, actually, I can't claim to do spoken word, because I think spoken word is an art of its own. And I cannot claim to be a spoken word artist, because that is some talent that I do not have. But a lot of my work needs to be seen. And that's kind of why I shared at the beginning with my poem, I put the words on the screen. It's not just for accessibility, but it's also for people to be able to see the way that I play with words. And so I think Gutsia has a lot of influence and listening to Gutsia has a lot of influence on the way that I write my own poetry. I do a lot of wordplay. I've always joked about how I'm a punny person. I love puns, right? But in my own poetry, I use a lot of, I use words in different ways, like with my name, and the way that I play with that too. So I do that in a lot of my poems. And when you read the poems, you'll kind of notice some of the word plays that happen. And I think I get that definitely from the Gutsia. And I do not have the Hmong vocabulary to do Gutsia on my own. I love listening to it, but I cannot come up with Gutsia on my own, because as my mom says, you have to be clever and smart and know the language well. And I am not all three of those things. So I cannot do all three. I cannot do Gutsia well, but my mom and my grandpa does. And I think that, again, Gutsia, it describes a situation using all these fancy words, right? And I think, to me, in my own poetry, that's a lot of what I do. And it's not that I try to use fancy words, but I think it's trying to describe a situation, an incident, something. Is trying to describe something using words that will help paint that situation or that thing for people, and without coming out to say this is the thing, right? Like if I'm talking about racism in my poetry, I don't actually I may not actually say the word racism in my poetry, but I'm describing it, right? Or if I'm talking about, like when I talk about gentrification in that poem about gentrification, I don't actually say gentrified or gentrification. I actually just describe the process of gentrification. And that to me is what Gutia does too, right? Gutia, for people who are not familiar with it, describes love for something or a memory, or describes something or an experience without actually coming out to say exactly what that experience is. It describes the experience, right? And so, I think that's that's why Gutia does what people say. It makes people feel kokoshia, right? Koshia as in, and there's no direct translation for that term really, right? Because it's more than like, it's like a longing for something or reminiscing or, just this feeling of something missing, right? And so, and Gutia does that. It makes people feel those ways because it describes experiences without coming out to say exactly what the experience may be. So that's a little bit about Gutia and kind of its influence on myself and my own poetry. I think, one day I aspire to be able to sing my own Gutia. My problem is I also do not sing well, and so it's hard to, I think, do Gutia when you also are not able to sing it very well. But I think my mom, she is a master of words, and so her Gutia are just amazing. But yeah, I learned so much from her all the time, and from my Yotzi, who is now no longer with us. But they really helped me to foster my love of poetry and my love of using words to describe the world that we live in, and paint pictures with words.
Thank you. Thank you. How about some questions from people out there in the audience this evening? Anyone, please? No one's taking my recommendation to Bailey asks, have you recorded any of your mom's singing?
I have. She's quite shy actually about her singing because she also doesn't think she has a good voice, so she is very shy about it. But after my grandpa passed away, we were camping as a family, and my mom felt that the place was just right, and she was like, hey, let's go over here, I want to sing some Gutia to you. I was like, okay. So we go, and I'm like, Mom, can I record it? And so she actually let me record it. So I do have some recordings of her Gutia. It's very rare to be able to have my mom let us record her, so I was very thankful that with that I was able to do that. And the Gutia that she sang 2 of them, and they were both about losing one's parents. One was specifically about losing her dad, my Yotzi, or my grandpa, but one was just more broadly about being an orphan. And she said that the one about being the orphan, it's what they called a learned Gutia. It's not a Gutia that is impromptu. So it's something that is taught. So there are Gutia that is taught that you can repeat and sing, and people who don't aren't able to come up with Gutia on their own can use that. So my mom says that they used to, for a lot of the young girls and boys at the New Year, they would learn Gutia to go sing to people, because oftentimes young people are not as skillful with words, and so they aren't able to come up with their own Gutia, so they would just learn Gutia. And so so that's one of the types of Gutia. But then the Gutia that, especially like Gutia Shilu or Gutia where there's a conversation going back and forth between 2 people, that is completely impromptu. And so I have recorded my mom's, her one impromptu, and then her one where she learned from, she said, her grandma, I believe. So yeah.
Thank you. Sarah, you've posed a question in the chat. I wonder if you'd be willing to speak it out. Sarah, how about unmuting and yeah.
I don't think you are unmuted.
Your voice is muted, Sarah. There you go.
I have to look at my question to ask it. Sorry. I really appreciated the political statement of not translating your Hmong sections to English in your poetry. And I wanted to ask you, as an educator and as someone who writes in Hmonglish, in the way that you naturally interweave your languages in this poetic biography, how do you see the role of language learning in critical ethnic studies? What's the role of teaching and learning Hmong in critical Hmong studies?
Yeah.
In what ways is it important to learn and study and write in a language to understand culture?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, that's such an important piece of, I think, critical ethnic studies is the language. And I think oftentimes when people think about language, they think of it as like being part of the humanities. And right now, right, like everything humanities is also being cut. But it is so important. And, you know, as even in my presentation, I think I said a couple of times, oh, there's no direct translation for this, right? Because there isn't. And so to be able to understand the heart of a culture and the soul of a people, you have to be able to understand the language. And I think, you know, even as people who are able to, and that's not to say that only Hmong people could do critical Hmong studies, or that only Hmong people could teach Hmong. I think, you know, if people are able to learn the language and they're able to have a really close relationship with the language and the community, right? Like they can do these things. And so, yeah, it is so important because so much of the culture is rooted in the language, and so much of the language is built into the culture, right? And so it's like it's hard to separate those two. And how do you talk about culture in a critical way if you don't have a concept for the language, right? And so yes, that is super important, and I think needs to be talked about more, but also I think I have to be careful here too, because sometimes when people think when we fight for Hmong studies, they think we just want Hmong language classes, right? And so it's like, that's not exactly it either. Yes, it's part of it, but also that's not all of it, because Hmong studies is not just all language too, right? There's so many aspects of our community and our lives and our histories and our presence that need to be brought into the curriculum, and it's not just language either. And so I think, you know, it's a really complex conversation to be had about the role of language and critical ethnic studies. But I think that those things need to go together. They can't be parsed apart. So yeah, I think, and that's something I need to think about more about how I would make my argument about that. But that is definitely a huge piece of it. And I think with the students that I work with, that's something that we talk about all the time, because we talk about how while there are no direct translations for certain Hmong words into English, there are also some terms that young people use that we do not have Hmong words for, right? So like in talking about, one student wanted to talk about their LGBT identities, right? And there was no Hmong term, no Hmong words, no Hmong concepts for it currently. And so how do we also, you know, because language is, it's socially constructed as well, right? And so things that are socially constructed were created by people, they can be changed by people, they can be you know, contributed to by people. And so we talk about, or with my young people, we we talk all the time about how do we build a lexicon of new Hmong concepts and language to talk about the things that we are living in, to talk about our various identities, right? And so, yeah, so we're also, while it's important to, know the language as it exists, it's also important to be able to create new language in our language to talk about the different things that we face in the different contexts that we live in. So yeah, so I think it's such a, like I said, complex topic, but it's so important to talk about, so that we can, especially when we build ethnic studies programs or when we fight for certain things at institutions for ethnic studies, we don't lose sight of these things and have them actually have them mean what we want them to mean. Yes.
I was thinking of a few things. First, two things, but now with what you just said, it's three things, and they're all sort of meshing together. But you gave us this image of having the tongue taken away and then sold back to you, and then this idea that, and it's true with a lot of languages and attempts in translation, but that there is no like English word for this concept. And then you're also talking about, people making the mistake of thinking Hmong studies as, language classes. But just that, taking away tongues is so convenient if you want to frame and create the language or steal the language. So like there's so many things, even, for so many marginalized people, there is a language that's taken away, even if it isn't like literal language. Like I always think about, the idea, it's like, oh, we don't want to say something that will offend someone. And offending someone isn't a really big deal. But the things that marginalized people go through and experience are huge deals. It's like, oh, I'm sorry I offended you. It's like, no, this is genocide. And there's a huge, huge difference. But sort of that language has been taken away, or it's not allowed to be in the conversation. And then you talk about existing some wanting to make other people comfortable at your own discomfort. And it's like, it's an interesting concept, and why do we do that? But there is, this class of people who feel entitled to be made comfortable. And it's like and that's an incredible rhetorical device, at least. And it's like, what do we do with that? It's like, we're supposed to make men comfortable. We're supposed to make white people comfortable. We're supposed to make people with privilege comfortable, and there are consequences, but they never fall on those people.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Yeah, actually, as you were talking, I was also thinking how you're right. Like, it's, even if it's not a literal language that is being taken away, right? Something is being taken away. It's not being able to have even if it's English, right? The language to talk about our experiences. And I think, that is such an important thing in the work that I do is, for me, theory, especially Black feminist theory, gave me the language, and critical race theory, right, gave me the language to talk about my oppression in English, right? So it's like I had never been able to, I experienced oppression, but I was never able to explain or talk about or think about the oppression that I was experiencing until theory gave me the language to talk about it, right? And I think, and that's, and again, I go back to, we shouldn't have to wait till we're in college to be able to be given the language to find our voice, to be able to stand in our identity, stand tall, and to stand firm, and to really fully understand who we are and how we exist and how we move through this world, right? So yeah, I love how you said that it doesn't have to be a literal language that's being taken away. It's sometimes just the language to be able to talk about an experience. And I think that's really kind of the first step to, for me, for healing, but also for really solving any kind of problem, right? Like in order to solve a problem, you have to name the problem. And if you can't name the problem, how are you going to ever fix it? So yeah, that's so important.
Well, I love the way that you said it. It's really tight and sharp and clear.
Beth, would you like to read your question out? Yep, there you go.
Thank you very much. So given what you just said about Black feminist theory and critical race theory, this might follow right upon. But my question is, and in great thanks, that I'm wondering whom you talk to when you write, and if there are poets and writers, critical theorists, histories, however well-known or unsung and kind of lost, whom you hail as you write, you know, who's in the room with you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I when I'm writing, I'm actually writing for, well, the younger me, right? I'm writing for young Hmong people who, you know, and actually I've led several groups with young people, middle schoolers, middle school Hmong girls and high school Hmong girls. And so many of them were able to resonate with the writings. And I think when I hear them talk about their experiences through my writing, and when I, you know, whenever people reach out to me and say, wow, like that this poem described perfectly how I was feeling, or this poem described exactly what I went through, that's what I'm writing for, right? I'm writing for people who had similar experiences, because even though we all have unique experiences, we have shared experiences in the oppression that we all live under, right? And so I want people to be able to find some solace in that they're not alone in feeling those things, but that also there's ways that they can express those things, and that there is healing that could be done in shared trauma, right? So if we're able to share something, a friend of mine used to say to me, something shared is something lifted, and it's true, right? Like when we share our stories, when we share the various traumas that we've experienced, it is something lifted, even if it's not complete healing, right? It's something that is taken from us, that then is put out there. And when we're finally able to put something out there that we have been carrying for so long, it just feels so much lighter. And that is one step towards healing, right? And so I think the book is very much about trauma and things, and not just trauma that we experience in the present, but like historical trauma and generational trauma. But the book is also very much about healing, and that's essentially what the third part of my book speaks to, right? Is the looking to the future, is this, you know, this vision of what a healed world could look like, you know, what somebody who loves themselves can look like, right? And I think in the work that I do, it sounds kind of flaky and cheesy, but it's like I try to teach people to love themselves, right? Because it took me so long to learn how to love myself, and I don't say that in like you know, like I said, it sounds so cheesy, but it sounds kind of almost simple, but it's like, it is a hard thing to do, is to learn how to love yourself, how to forgive yourself, especially as a minoritized young person living in this country, right? You go through most of your public education without seeing yourself reflected in the curriculum, but also certain things are stripped away from you, right? So many different things, you know, even if it's your physical language, right? Like I see so many young people, Hmong people who once they go to elementary school, they choose not to speak Hmong anymore because it's not spoken in school. Or, you know, as young people, I remember as a young child, my friends and I, we used to equate being able to speak English well with being smart, right? And so if you weren't in ESL and you tested out of ESL, it meant you were smart, and that's why you weren't in ESL. So like, it's like these types of things, right? And so, yeah, that's who I talk to is young people, young Hmong people, myself, right? Like the younger me who needed somebody to say these things to them or tell them you're not alone in feeling these things. But also, you know, a lot of my work, and it's really to pay homage to the people who came before me as well. So, you know, I stand tall because I stand on the shoulders of giants, right? I stand on the shoulders of Hmong women who came before me, who paved paths where there were none, who, you know, were able to cut down trees so that we could see, right? So that's who I'm paying homage to, is my elders and these strong Hmong women that came before me that helped pave the way for me to be here. So yeah, that's who I'm writing to. That's who I'm writing for. That's why I write, right? It's for all of these things. But again, I mostly write for anyone who can resonate with my writing. I've talked to people from other minoritized groups, right? Other folks of color who have shared that, wow, like that really resonated with me. Or I have some poems in there about capitalism, and you know, white people have said that resonates with me, right? And so it's like, that's exactly what I want poetry to do, is for it to be felt by people. My poetry is only as powerful as it is felt by others. So yeah.
Thank you. We're getting to the end of our time here. One last question from anyone?
I saw a couple questions that we didn't get to. And so I'm gonna address them a little bit here. So Clarence,
Sure.
Black feminist writings that I find most helpful. Oh my goodness. Bell Hooks was, yes, the late Bell Hooks. Her work is just transformational for me as an educator, as a scholar, as a feminist. I never identified as a feminist because white feminism didn't speak to me as a college student. It wasn't until I came to grad school and started reading Bell Hooks, started reading Audre Lorde, started reading Patricia Hill Collins, that I was like, wow, this is the feminism that feels the closest to what I want feminism to feel like and look like, right? And so that those are kind of my intro to Black feminism, but also my intro to feminism that felt the most authentic to me. So yeah, and I think as I work with other Hmong feminists now to kind of build what Hmong feminism may look like, I think that so much of our work is informed by these Black feminists and Black scholars that, you know, really put theory out there that is so empowering for the rest of us to be able to, you know, come to our own. So yeah, so that those are some of the writings that I found super helpful and powerful as even now, actually, not just as I was starting kind of this work, but yeah. And then to Sarah, your question about research. Yeah, so as I mentioned, I do participatory action research, which is it's essentially, it's not just collaborative research, it's essentially training communities or members of the community to be researchers. So we actually spend, I do workshops with our students to train them to do research. It's incredible to me that like so many undergrads don't know how to do research because we don't teach them how to do research. We tell them to do research, but we don't teach them how to do research. And so that's what we spend a lot of time doing in our the first year of our research team. For anybody who's new, we do workshops with them. We train them how to do research. We train them about what research is, the different types of research, different tools for doing research, methods, methodologies, all of those things. And so in doing PAR, we let the community, or in this case, the students, kind of take the project wherever they want it to go, because we want to do work that they feel is going to benefit their community. And so all the research questions were formed by our students, and it was all through conversations that they had with each other. They had conversations about their different experiences and the things that they struggle with. And then out of those conversations, and we also do journaling with them. So they, out of their journaling and their conversations with each other, they were able to come up with a research protocol. And that's kind of how they came up with that. And then like all the ways that we decide to put out our work and the ways that we use our work is all decided on by them. So they tell us how they feel would be the most powerful way to put their work out there. And also they tell us how they want it to influence policy. So, you know, we were able to establish not yet a Hmong studies certificate here at UW-Madison, but we were able to get a Hmong studies emphasis under the Asian American Studies certificate here. And so, and that was because of the research that they were doing. And also we've talked to legislators. We right now are working with advisors at UW-Madison in trying to inform advising practices. And yeah, so these students are doing incredible work. They worked with the Gates Foundation, actually the Bill Gates Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to get more funding for these types of initiatives for participatory action research projects so that other young people across the nation could have access to this this kind of experience and this kind of empowerment. So yeah, they're doing all sorts of stuff, and we again let them lead. We just provide any kind of scaffolding, mentorship that we can, and we support them where they need us to. But most of our support comes in teaching them how to do the research and really getting, you know, and the academic researchers on our team are PhD folks. And so they, you know, having the PhD gets us access into peer-reviewed journals, right? That's another struggle on its own. I think that PAR is something yet to be fully accepted by the academic community, but yeah, that's something we're still working towards. But yeah, so it's really just, that's how we've been working with this community. And I hope that one day we could continue to do it outside of the university with other communities. And I know there are people doing the work. There are scholar activists out there doing that type of work already. So we're also learning from them.
Do you want to take this last question that's come in the chat, please?
How does your work help young people? How to be angry? Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. So I think that it teaches, I don't know. I only know from what people have said to me when they reached out to me, right? In that it helps them feel empowered to feel these things because they feel validated, right? I think that validation in how we feel and validation for the experiences that we have sometimes get undermined. And that's such an important thing too, right? Is to just feel that what we are going through is, to know that what we're going through is real. So I think a lot of times when people reach out to me and they say, wow, like this really spoke to me, but also I didn't know that other people could feel this way. Right. Like a lot of the, I put out work out there a couple years ago now. Yes. When right after the George Floyd murder had happened. And I at first didn't want to put it out because I saw the way that some of my mentors were being treated, right? And so I had one of my mentors, Dejsiab, who is the co-executive director of Freedom Inc. here in Madison. She was getting all sorts of backlash for saying, for calling people out on their anti-Blackness, for just getting talking about the George Floyd stuff, basically. So she was getting threats, she was getting all sorts of things. And I saw other women, Hmong women, being treated the same way, and mostly by Hmong men, straight Hmong men, right? Who would threaten them or say things to them, or try to scare them off, so that, or troll, right? What we call trolling now on social media, to get them to silence them. And I was talking to Gajwa about this because I wrote this poem about, it's called Uncle Two, I See You, I Hear You. And it's a very, it's a poem that is a very angry poem, and it calls out the Uncle Twos, right? Or cis het moment, basically. And I think when I put that out, when I was going to put it out there, I saw the way that these women were being treated, and I didn't put it out there right away. So I had a conversation with Gajwa, and she said, Mai Neng, the reason why I was so, or the reason why I'm really hurt about all of this, it's not because I have thick skin. Oh, she says, I have thick skin. So the things that people say don't hurt me. But what does hurt me is knowing that it is silencing other people, right? Like, these people are threatening me. They are saying these things to me to scare other Hmong women and girls off, to silence them, right? And I thought, and I told her, I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what it did to me, right? And I feel like I myself am a very outspoken person, but it scared me into silence to see the way that other Hmong women were being treated because they were calling out anti-Blackness. And so after talking with her, I was like, you know what, I'm going to put it out there. So I put my that poem, specifically that poem out there. But just about my other works, especially when I put out works about domestic violence or work about patriarchy, when I put work like that out there, I get all sorts of backlash from Hmong men all the time. I do, and people, not specific threats, but people saying things like, oh, somebody tell her husband to come get her, or oh, this girl probably isn't married because she is like this, or she thinks this way, or oh my God, right? So like, people saying all these things, again, perpetuating the patriarchy, but also making the point that I make in my poems. But I think, so I think whenever I put out work, I'm very mindful of that, that I want young women and girls to feel like they could be heard, and that they could say these things, and that they could be angry, and that they could be loud, and to not be scared into silence by the backlash that they will receive, and that even if even if you're not loud, it's still okay, right? Like, you can still feel these things and not be loud about it, but just know that you're not alone. So that's what I hope my work does for young Hmong girls specifically. But I really hope that it goes beyond just young Hmong girls. I really hope that it goes for anybody who feels silenced by the threats, by really anyone out there that tries to shut us down in speaking our truth.
Thank you. Mai Neng, thank you so much for sharing so much with us tonight. It's been inspiring to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Wow. And Robin, thank you for your partnership. Bailey, thank you for your work tonight with the tech. Brian Zhang, thank you for publishing this book. I don't know, the world would be such a diminished place if this book were not in it. So thank you, Brian. Mai Neng, I hope that this is just the beginning of a relationship with all of us. Thank you. And everyone stay well and come back for more History Revealed programs. As Brian put in the chat, you can purchase a copy of Mai Neng's book from Hmong Educational Resources. And again, as I was saying, we have a few copies that we're happy to hand out from the Eastside Freedom Library. Thank you, Mai
Thank you
Neng.
all. Yep, thank you all. Have a good night.
Ciao. Yeah.